Well, everybody keep eating, and we'll kind of bring this meeting to a beginning here. We've all met already. Chris, everybody on here, I can introduce you to him just because it's such a small group, it'll mean something. Chris is my bestie, lives down in Durham, North Carolina, and has got a minute to join us tonight, and so he's gonna pop in. He probably was one of the people that started me on my journey towards understanding racism and my place in it. And so he's been wanting to be on calls so far, but has been busy and at different times. So he's here tonight with us. I'm going to turn this over to Jessica, and I would love to hear, and I know we had texted about this earlier, just with what happened this afternoon and your reaction, and maybe whatever that means for us tonight. I don't care. We could talk about that the whole night if you want to, but I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and thanks everyone, and welcome, Chris. It's really good to see a new face and all the familiar ones. I'm really glad that we've all kind of gotten here today, and it's been a very interesting afternoon. And I think over the last couple of sessions, like I've opened up with some type of social acknowledgement of what's happening and going on in our worlds and our day to day, and how it relates to what we're talking to. And personally, I was at work still listening as I was still working to the verdicts. And I remember when the judge walked out and started talking, and I just couldn't concentrate on the last email that I needed to send, and listened to every single verdict being read and him asking every juror, is this what you want to do? It was unanimous. It was almost too fast, I think. I don't know what I was expecting to like hear or to see. And then to see some of the commentary from different national news outlets, to hear from the family that Biden called them. And there's been this dialogue already. And Biden and Vice President Harris are supposed to give a statement tonight. I don't know when, but they're going to be doing it later this evening. But there's been this this kind of back and forth on justice versus accountability. I've been seeing that a lot on social already, and that, yes, this is justice, but is it more so accountability for really getting do what you've done? And so it was just an interesting thing that, yeah, it's justice, and justice is like this all-encompassing kind of overarching kind of thing. But then when you really break it down to the accountability piece, that part really stuck to me. And I was a little bit somber. I wanted to cry, but couldn't. And then going through these thoughts of like, yes, George Floyd, and just like the lack of human dignity overall, and what it means to how we treat all of people as humans. It's just really, really impactful, empowering. I am curious. Sentencing isn't until 8 weeks from now, so a couple of months. So I will be interested to see what that part is like. But for now, just to kind of relish in the verdict that was read today. So I don't know if anybody else wants to share. I think that's something to fully acknowledge and to open up with and to talk about, if anybody has any thoughts.
Hi, everyone. I know I'm the guest here, but I don't mind chiming in. Yeah, I talked to a few of my friends right after it happened. And without going into my biography, I grew up in Northern Indiana. I did undergrad and grad school in Ohio, where I met Benji. And then I lived in Illinois for 3 years, then moved to Durham, North Carolina. And I I remember when Rodney King happened. I remember the OJ verdict, but I was just reflecting today, being a white male in Northern Indiana, no one ever taught me why it matters, why these trials and verdicts matter. And so it's amazing to look at my life and see how different this feels to me, because I've had the chance to develop some deep friendships here in Durham with Black families and Black men and women, and so yeah, my eyes have completely shifted from when I was in my teens and those things were happening. So anyway, that's my experience, but yeah, very moving.
Great. And honestly, if anybody else wants to chime in on and talk about that throughout the time that we have together, feel free to do so. And if anything also comes up, like some breaking news, like feel free to chime that in too as well. But wanted to jump into the chapters, and I remember talking to Benji as we were discussing even just the beginning of what this is and what it's going to look like, and just walking through the book. And I remember telling him that chapter 5 was a hard read for me when we got to this chapter. And the way that Dr. Livingston spelled it out was almost like jarringly eye-opening to me, almost in a way that explained kind of what I was thinking and feeling, but didn't really know how to put it to words. And so also in the link that I sent out last week, and I'll put it back in the chat again, that we have a dedicated blog spot on Yalbert website. And so I will be posting the questions there prior to the session. So if you would like to read those over, if it'll help you kind of think about what you want to bring to the conversation in sessions, just a little plug there. But chapter 5, how does threat perpetuate racial inequality? And I love that he puts threat in quotation marks, because it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? And what does that look like? And I'm pretty sure some of you, if not all, have read the chapters, or this chapter specifically. And my initial thought and curiosity is to just get a kind of overall thought about what you thought about the chapter, and when you read it, like how it made you feel. Because even as a Black woman, it was jarring for me. So I'm curious as to if anyone else just had some initial thoughts on the chapter before we just delve in.
I was, I don't know exactly what the word to describe it is, but when he described the difference between us, like a, the perceptual threats and how things are perceived in a way, and then, and how the different ways people can like conflate things in their mind because of the way things stand out and things like that, was very, I guess, illuminating to me, because I could never understand why people were threatened. And so, I mean, at least it gave me a level of understanding, even if I still I'm like, really? Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like, it gave me a place to at least look at how it got to the way, the way that it is that people think. And I mean, I've read the chapters where up until tonight, I'm kind of going as we're going. So I haven't read on. So I don't know if like coming up there's like, okay, well this is this, and like here's a way to address it. Because I'm still like in my mind, I was like wanting to get to that. But it was nice to at least, because I mean, to me it just always seemed like insanity. And it's like, well, how can that many people just be insane? And so giving these theories and concepts that explain how bias happens, at least gave me a place to like start to work with it in my mind. So I felt that, but it's, to you know, to look at people and to think that, I don't know, I'm going to stop.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. One of the things, and a lot of it stood out to me in this chapter, and to what you were just mentioning about structural threat and psychological threat, that there's the threat to the structure, and it's almost like the Derek Chauvin verdict is like a threat to the structural structure of how things are. Like I was just thinking in my mind, like for a lot of people, especially probably like white people or people in power, like this is going to really shake some people up, because for the first time in a more jarring way in a long time, like someone is being held accountable in a way that probably wouldn't have happened in the past and on this kind of platform. And so I think that's like a threat to the structure of kind of like the way things are and the way things have been. And some of the commentary I was listening to, yeah, it's cool to like pass legislation and laws, and we need that, but to like hold somebody accountable to that is really the key here. And also the psychological threat, and how this is where, as I was growing up, my mom would talk to me about things like that, and talk to me about like just your mere presence of being a competent person, especially being a competent Black woman, is a threat. And I never really understood it growing up. And he says it here in the book that Dr. Livingston discusses how the success of a Black person or Black people, Black leaders, and the mere competence of Black leaders, especially Black men leaders, all propose threats to white people. And just you showing up, because there's an expectation that like you compartmentalize people to be in a certain way, and that, you know, Black people behave this way, or people that are less than, and that's your expectation. And it's okay to be, you know, over there, but when you're actually competent, just showing up in the world where you're leveling the playing field, it becomes something that is more of a threat. And Melissa, I see the little hand of that hand.
Yeah, I wonder if people will actually be shocked, because meaning like certain white people in power, because the way I see kind of the narrative around whiteness is very much around individualism. And so it's about, we got rid of a bad apple, because, you know, police are actually in general spectacular. We just got to get rid of this bad apple. And so I think in general, I imagine most white people will be like, great, but they won't ever think about, why did he ever think that that was an appropriate like thing to do, like so cavalier, you know? Likely because people before him have not gotten in trouble for it. Now, if anybody, there may be, the only people who might be shook are like overtly racist police officers who have gotten away with this. You know, maybe they needle somebody's neck and they didn't die, you know, but they've been doing it. I feel like he was way too comfortable. He probably did that before, just the person didn't die. You know, whatever happened, they just didn't die. Like that was too easy of a response. And so I think we'll see change when people understand, shift to a systems institution mentality than a bad apples narrative, because almost anybody else doesn't get bad apple narrative. It's like they're a reflection of their group, right? This Black person that did this thing is a reflection of Black people. But you won't say that the FedEx killer is a reflection of white men. Like, he's a bad apple, right? So folks who aren't white don't get to be individualized. They're a reflection of a stereotype. And so I think when stuff starts to shift, I think that's when we'll know stuff starts to shift.
And that kind of talks about a little bit into the next chapter, chapter 6, where he talks about how we just group and stereotype in our mind, how it's ingrained in us and we're wired that way to be like that anyway. As how we go through life is like the way that we process things as humans. We have to put things and put people in groups because that's how we can deal with it. And the way that he equates that and that theory into what you were just saying is really good. And some of the thoughts like that Dr. Livingston was talking about, where he outlines how Black people often have to play down their achievements, or code switching is what kind of like the new jargon is right now, and how we sometimes have to diminish ourselves in order to not be seen as too much or to be threatening to our counterparts, because of the ramifications that can happen with that. And one of the places that he's said is that Black people can be punished for celebrating their achievements and having confidence and even be described as arrogant. We see this, he alluded to like football players making touchdowns and Colin kneeling during the national anthem, things like that. And yeah, and the opposite of that, that Black people are rewarded for being humble and using disarming mechanisms as to not appear as better than. And I'm wondering, have we seen kind of in this group or your thoughts like of where you've seen this play out in your own personal experiences, or either of you've been the culprit and didn't really realize it, or you know people who have behaved like this before?
For me, I think the first awareness for me was at some point in my 20s, becoming aware that everybody in the world didn't think exactly like I thought. Up until that point, for what all of the sheltered reasons that existed, I just assumed that everybody was the same. If I felt this way about something, everybody felt this way about something. And so that awakening then led to, I might not celebrate a touchdown dance that way, but that doesn't mean that there aren't a billion other people in the world that would, or whatever. That's a very easy way to say it. And so that's where, as I read through chapter 5, of course, I read kind of with a jaded twist, because I kept thinking, well, I wonder what was so powerful in this for Jessica. But it's a very powerful chapter. And when he started talking about that, and then I realized, and then he says pretty point blank, I think the line is, if we summarize the origins of racism, this is on 80, the bottom of second paragraph from the bottom. If we summarize the origins of racism and sexism in a single word, it is power. It is both the desire to maintain power and the fear of losing power. And the word fear is what jumped out to me. Of course, I know that, threat was also the word in quotation marks for this. But I realized that in any circumstance, somebody doing something different than you do it, no matter the color of the skin, no matter whatever, creates otherness, and as a child or as whatever, that is fear, because you've never seen it before. You don't know how to encounter it. You don't know what to do with it. But as you get older, at least for me, as it just was like, oh, okay, I see otherness now as diversity and as beauty and as another way to look at things. And of course, this is for all kinds of stuff. But then as I look at it in this certain circumstance and the way he lays it out, I'm like, yes, it's very, if you don't have a safe environment as a child, I think especially, to be able to unpack some of this kind of stuff, you carry it with you into adulthood. And when you do, you begin to live out of it. And that's the thing that I think was the most eye-opening for me, is I'm like, man, you could be, if you don't have an awakening moment, as a white male, you could be 25, 35, 55, and you've built on 30 years of not good stuff. And now where do you start to unpack it from? Because now you really have self-defense mechanisms up, and you really don't want your systems to fail, and you really don't want to be wrong. And it was just like, wow, yeah, the threat, that he's talking about was that's kind of how it all enveloped for me as I read through this chapter. And I do want you to tell me as you go forward what in chat specifically about it was like this was the linchpin for you.
Yes. And I'm happy to jump into that now because you brought up the power piece, which I love that part of the chapter at the end when he really defines like what it is, like the heart and soul of racism. And what was so jarring for me is the starting on page 79 and talking about dominance in white male leaders and how people perceive dominance from a white man, a black man, and a white woman and black woman, and what that perpetuates and what that means. And especially within leadership, which is something that like I aspire to and want to accomplish a lot of things in my life. And it's like, okay, so how am I being perceived and why is that? And the results of the study that he was saying, he referenced like some particulars from the research. But on page 80, he says, and I have it like highlighted, like this was like the part for me where I just like really was just like, oh my goodness. That the results show that the black male leader and white female leader were rated significantly more negatively when they showed dominance rather than docility. On the other hand, the evaluation of the white male leader did not depend on what type of behavior he adopted. White male leaders could show dominance without suffering any penalty for it. And we've seen that play out even just in recent days and today. And interestingly, Black women also were not penalized for showing dominance. However, follow-up research suggests several caveats. First, Black women can show dominance only when they exhibit what is referred to as administrative agency, assertiveness to get the job done, rather than ambitious agency, assertiveness to get ahead or to gain personal power. And that stood out to me because I view myself as being very ambitious in many respects, and the things that I want in life and the things that I want to give to other people. But put into a place where I pretty much have worked in corporate America and for the bulk of my life, that's threatening. Like administratively assertiveness to get the job done. It's like, yeah, I can organize, I can, project manage, I can shuffle papers, I can, when you show up, things are there and they're ready to go and they're great and they're awesome because I can do an administrative job. But when it comes to ambition, really inserting yourself and having a seat at the table, that's where the issue comes in. And he goes on to say, second, Black women can show dominance only when their performance is nearly perfect. If they make mistakes, they are penalized more than either white women or Black men, presumably because they don't fit the ideal leader profile, being neither male nor white. Finally, Black women are given more latitude because they are seen as less feminine than white women and less threatening than Black men, which frees them to behave in a more dominant manner. And he says that it is power. It is both the desire to maintain power and the fear of losing power that summarizes origins of racism that you just discussed. And that paragraph was just so illuminating to me because the consideration of the ambition piece, but also that if I do make a mistake, and I've seen that in my own life, if I've made a mistake in some of the jobs I've done in the past, I'm looked at more harshly and it's easier to do that. And then also the fact that he goes on to say that that we're viewed less than white women and even Black men in leadership. Like we're at the very bottom, and it just grinds my gears because as much as we say that we want Black leadership, when if people really get down to it and kind of understand this, it explains a lot of behavior and experiences that I've personally have experienced in my work life. But to really, I think, have it put down on paper in a very objective way, just laying it out as he does was really just the kicker for me because I understood what he was saying. And as a person who wants to be a leader in her community and my job and all of that stuff, it's to know how you're perceived is and working, also knowing how you're perceived, but also not working against it, but doing the work in spite of and how you do it. It's always a thought that I'm thinking about. So there was. And yes, for different resources, also please feel free to hop that in the chat. We do save them and put them on the link so that everybody can view them. But I didn't mean to go off on a tangent, but that was just kind of my space. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, no, you don't ever apologize for going off on that tangent. Yeah, so qualifier, I haven't read the book, so I'm not up with the conversation with y'all, but I keep thinking of Beyonce's Homecoming, honestly, when we talk about this like ambition and that just this celebration of Black bodies and I mean, at a huge festival where it had never happened before, and how I mean, it was powerful me, and I'm not a Black person in this culture, so yeah, I just keep going back to Beyonce's Homecoming when I think of I don't know, a message against that traditional narrative that Dr. Livingston is talking about.
What what came up for me? Well, first, also love Beyonce's Homecoming, and what I loved about it is that I imagine that 90% of that audience, who was often white, they're like, I don't get it. What is so? Apparently, the thing that was most researched after that was what was the song that Beyonce sang in the beginning, which I thought was really hilarious, which was Lift Every Voice, which is the Negro national anthem. And I was like, this is so great. Like, I didn't go to an HBCU. I went to a predominantly white institution, but I never went to my homecoming. I went to University of Florida. I always went to FAMU. Always went to FAMU's homecoming because it was the best. So I always went to, so all that stuff, like and I'm in a sorority, a Black sorority. So all the stuff they were doing with the bugaboos, I was like, oh, this is for us. And so this idea of like, in a very white space, not centering whiteness, I think that was the biggest thing. It wasn't even so much that this was a Black woman doing super Black cultural stuff. It was like, you're doing this in front of a white audience and you don't care that they don't get it. which is like, it's like never happens. And there's like 3 Black people in the front, like, oh, we know what that is. Well, I thought was great. Anyway, but the other thing, so really what that makes me think about the research around Black women is when I don't know if y'all remember, I forget her name. She wrote the book Lean In about women in power and how we need to like.
Yeah, Sheryl Sandberg.
Yeah. So when she came out with that book some years ago, at that point, Bell Hooks was doing a residency at Ohio State. And she was like, Bell Hooks was like, this is not thinking about Black women. Like, no, white women are not leaning in for Black women. Like, we have data. Like, this is not like they won't. And so how this is very much not thinking about how these structures are actually set up. And I mean, I was a student at the time, so I wasn't really looking at corporate, and I was like, because that was very interesting. And even the way in which she's talking about lean in very much was kind of grounded in privilege in certain kinds of ways. So and also thinking about this this fake kind of narrative around meritocracy again. So this idea of you're supposed to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but when people do or try to, like you don't always, you're still not getting the support you need along the way. So it's just very interesting when people have that comeback. Well, if you just work hard, it's like, it's not easy. No matter where you are. So whether you're in poverty, whether you're working class, or whether you're in corporate America, like it's not always that simple. And I think we don't always think about how privilege operates, how so much of it is about what you don't see, not what you actually get.
Sorry, I've been hesitating to talk because my internet is unstable, apparently. So
You're fine.
I don't know. I might turn my video off and see if it helps. But so now I'm just a square. But
Okay.
I was thinking, Melissa, you were talking about like the pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Has anybody read or seen the Hillbilly Elegy? And it was actually, I can't tell if people are nodding or responding because my internet is so terrible.
Oh no.
So I might just have to type.
No, I haven't.
You're fine.
We could hear you, Meredith.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you just couldn't hear us.
Okay.
But we could hear you.
Okay, I couldn't hear anybody and everybody's frozen on my screen.
Oh yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so it was very interesting. So this white man grew up in Appalachia and he became a very successful lawyer, and he wrote this book, and he got a lot of criticism because of what you were explaining, Melissa. He was saying if you grow up in a certain neighborhood and you do this and you do that and you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, then you will be successful in this country, and it's on you to deal with it. And a lot of people gave him a lot of pushback because of what you were mentioning about the systems not supporting those individuals. So if anybody, ever got a chance to read it, it's an interesting book, and the movie's interesting as well.
Can you put it in the chat, Meredith?
He came to Ohio State to talk, and just reading the summary of the book was triggering, so I didn't go.
Oh, this is good. This is really good. And it also makes me think about, which is a great kind of like segue into something else that Dr. Livingston talks about, like when we were just reading through that piece of research and theory that I was talking about. In the next chapter, in chapter 6, when we talk about kind of the groupings of people, he discusses and defines the need for assimilation and differentiation, and why those two pieces are different. And initially, so I read the book, the Stamped Remix book, and it was really good. It was part of the Columbus Library was doing a series on the book, and kind of had like a major book club across the city, if you will, and brought the author in as well. And I'll put the book link in the chat in a moment. But it talked about how like leaders in the past, like Langston Hughes and W.E.B. Du Bois, like when they were kind of going through all of these times in the past, and how like the difference between assimilation and being different, and that why as a Black person, especially a Black male, you had to assimilate to be seen as same, which this book had me thinking as he broke down as to why these two pieces are different and how it plays into racism. interesting that as human beings, like we want to fit in and we want to, not be seen as different because different or other has been deemed bad, which is a whole other conversation in itself. But at the same time, it's really kind of interesting to see that some people would agree that assimilation is a thing and that you would want to assimilate to be better versus like being different and not being wanted to be put into a group. So I don't know if this concept was something new for any of the readers, or just talking about that in general, like the difference between assimilation and not, and what that kind of means. I feel like if I'm calling myself out, I've had to do it a lot. Almost like to be seen as same. It kind of brings me back to high school a little bit. So it just kind of made me think about that as we're thinking about like grouping people and feeling stereotypes and how he contextualizes it in the book.
I'm also reading, I don't know if I mentioned to this before, but I'm also reading, did I say this before? Grandmother's
No.
Hands? I didn't. So it's Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. And so he's a therapist, somatic therapist, which means he talks about the ways in which trauma shows up in the body. And how we respond to different bodies. He talks about police, he talks about white bodies, he talks about Black bodies. And one of the things he says is he starts off early talking about genetic memory and how we can carry some of the trauma from our ancestors within our genes. We've seen this with Holocaust survivors, folks who talk about this with descendants of slaves, or enslaved Africans particularly. So he says there's also, what also gets passed down genetically are survival mechanisms. And he talks about assimilation as a trauma response for folks who were othered. So if you want to blend in, it's likely because your ancestors were harmed because they stood out. And so thinking about, so that's what resonated for me, and thinking about what kind of ancestral memory we're carrying in. And he talked about how that trauma so many people have experienced. So he goes all the way back to like medieval trauma, right? So like it was normal for folks to be like drawn and quartered and that be a public spectacle, right? For folks to, this is like medieval Europe, right? So you could be going to the grocery store and somebody's head is on a stick, like you're just walking by. Like what do you have to do in your body to be able to walk by that all the time? Right? And he goes into how then European immigrants then brought that same trauma, and having seen those same torture mechanisms utilized on Indigenous and African people. So if you ran away, one of the scare tactics was to cut the person's head off and put it in a stick in front of the house, the quarters, right? The enslaved quarters. He talks about the Duluth lynchings, which was, if you Google Duluth lynchings, you'll see these images, and which I've seen that image before, but I didn't know it was in Minnesota, which then helps to contextualize like everything that's happening now, and how across the country it was very normal for folks to go to lynchings as a public spectacle and take a picture in front of the bodies. And so saying like, so he talks about what did you have to do in your body to like be there, to be the photographer, to like, did you justify it by saying, well, I didn't buy the rope, I didn't actually cut their heads off, like I didn't do it, I'm just here I'm just here watching. And so, or if you were the family member of the person who was lynched, like then you're thinking about, how do I avoid being that, right? And so talks about all these different tools that either were directly passed down to you, or he says that can be like in our bodies. And so it, yeah, that's what came up for me. I don't want to post the link in the chat, but if you feel like Googling Duluth lynchings, then didn't do that, but yeah.
Can you post the book in the chat? And Chris wrote that he was born in Duluth. So very interesting.
I just bought that book too. Thanks, Melissa.
I love it. One of the parts of, like at the end of chapter 6 that I thought was interesting, and it's kind of speaking to, Melissa, what you were just speaking about, and then as we've talked about previously before about being an individual and being a different, and he talks about how how being an individual person, just being simply an individual, is considered a privilege and something that I hadn't really thought about too deeply before, because society and a lot of our culture like preaches like individuality and being yourself, and how that's so beautiful, but just like the privilege of being an individual person. And he says, and Melissa, we talked about this earlier, that white people who commit negative behaviors are almost never encoded as quote unquote white. The negative behaviors are noticed, but the whiteness of the individual committing the behaviors doesn't register. That is why white people can have unracialized personal identities and the privilege of simply being an individual person. The result is that negative actions perpetrated by white people are attributed to characteristics of the individual. And he puts lone wolf in parentheses in quotes, and or their presumed state of mental health. He was just having a bad day. We've all heard. It is also why white criminals, even the most egregious ones, do not affect the image of white people in general ways that Muslims or Black criminals do. For example, are used to justify discrimination against these groups in general. So it's like one of those, like all Black people are bad. Like he writes, when negative behaviors are committed by people of color, both the behavior and the person's race or ethnicity are encoded and become part of the memory, automatically producing the tendency to overestimate how often negative acts are committed by people of color. And speaking of encoding, speaking to what we carry in our bodies, what we carry in our thoughts and like our minds every day, like what that dictates, really speaks to the heart of this here. And I'm glad isn't the word I want to use, but really to have this conversation and it be brought up just by natural experiences or just like natural discussion, and then going back and finding these same things to be true as what we're reading is pretty phenomenal, I think. But I thought that was really, really interesting to hit on, especially since we've been talking about it over the last kind of almost hour.
How long do you think, like realistically, you think about, I mean, hundreds of years, 400 years, let's say, of atrocities, more, but just for the sake of the discussion, does it take 400 years to turn the tide back to, is there that much healing needed? You know, you're talking about generations of trauma, and that's where I wonder, like, is it our kids? Is it our kids' kids? Like, how big is our vision here, realistically, and what do we do in our portion of that, to set up the stage for the next portion, whatever that will be. That's where, and of course, I'm always outcome driven. How do we fix it? Can we do it? Can we have it fixed by tomorrow? Because if we can, then we, so realistically, like, what is it that is even a realistic expectation? I don't know. Like, when I listen to you two women talking about what I'll never understand personally, I have so much hope because of the work you're doing. But then I think, how much work do I have to do? How much work do we have to do as a white society? And I mean, hundreds of years, it has to be, or not. I don't know. Just what's your opinion on that?
Part of my opinion that I'll start with is, as you were talking and thinking about, like, how do we reckon this, like, make it right and all of that. I think what's become hard and, like, very apparent to see is that still it's hard for many people to acknowledge that this is even a thing. Like, you talk about racism, you talk about all of this, but it's like, no, imagine if there wasn't a video camera recording what happened with George Floyd, or what happened with the bird watcher in Central Park who just asked the lady to put her dog on a leash, and she said that he attacked her, which was completely not true. And just acknowledging that, like, those types of thoughts or behaviors exist, and that, wow, what am I going to do about it once I acknowledge it? And you see, even in politics, like, a lot of people think of this stuff isn't real, and what they're saying is still right. And that, to me, the acceptance part of it, and actually acknowledging and saying, and raising my hand and saying, hey, this is wrong, or this really does happen to you, and I empathize because I see it and I acknowledge it. How do I fix it? That's the first one. And the second, for those who do have the power to do it, I was watching a documentary over the weekend, and it's called Poverty Inc. It's on Prime Video, and it talks about the basically the business of poverty, especially as it relates to humanitarian aid, and how the cycle really negatively impacts countries that, for example, in Haiti, they interviewed a lot of people from Haiti, and how, like, you do these government subsidies and you give them free food, or give them what you think a poor person or poor society is. And if it's subsidized and free, it takes away from local business owners and local farmers, that they have plenty of land to do what they want to do, but they can't feed themselves because of the way that it's all set up. And one of the first talking points was that there is power to change it, but for those who are in power, the change would impact them so significantly that it's not worth the change, because either people that are considered other or less than, or however, you finally give them opportunity and they show you what you can do, that takes away from the power of someone who already has it, who doesn't want to give it up, and for obvious reasons, and what lies in it. So that's the kind of the two pieces, of the acknowledgement, and that those who are in power, that have the resources, the connections, the know-how to do it, are they even willing to do it, knowing that it'll be a sacrifice for them? And there are some things that people just don't want to give up.
How do we challenge that system? I mean, obviously global stuff is going on, but in our own communities, the power structure exists all the way down. And, how do we, from all sexes and races, begin to challenge that power structure? Is it something that we don't do? Maybe, like, we don't. I always have this notion that if we really wanted to make change in America, we'd stop paying income tax. And if a big enough group did it, we would have a massive enough change, because we'd hit them right where it hurts with the money. But what can we, and so that would be not doing something. How do we do that effectively, and even just in small ways to usurp that power structure? Or, I mean, does anybody have any ideas?
I think so so a couple things. I think one thing, when we do this work, we have to make sure that we are attempting to answer our own questions first, because sometimes we put the burden on the, I'm not saying this is what you're doing, but in general, we tend to put the burden on the marginalized person to answer the questions of the person with privilege, as opposed to the person with privilege going to maybe other folks in privilege who are more aware to get those answers. Because not only are we trying to manage the system and address the system, then we also have to teach you the system, which is very labor intensive and incredibly exhausting. And so thinking about making sure we're aware of what we're doing in those situations, I think to build off of what Jessica was saying, is that a lot of people, there are like levels to this, of being aware of what racism is. And I think too many people see racism as like the Duluth lynchings, right? So there's some language around, so now there's a if you will, a burgeoning genre around Black horror. Because there are areas in which Black people have not been able to exist in mainstream media. One is sci-fi. So it essentially says that Black people won't be there in the future. Like this idea of like, there's not a lot of Black people in like Star Trek, not a lot of Black people in like magical spaces, right? Or people of color. So this idea that we don't belong there, we can't be there. But also in horror, other than being the first people to die, like to like center our stories in horror has been very different. And Jordan Peele has kind of initiated this mainstream. But one thing that has come up, I don't know if you've seen this series called Them on Amazon Prime, which I don't like horror. I'm not watching it. But there's an article around how this type of genre is essentially it doesn't critique white supremacist structures in ways that aren't overt, right? So then you can have a white audience that says, well, I'm not that kind of racist. I don't do that. But you don't necessarily go back and think about how you chose this neighborhood over this neighborhood. Like you're not really digging into that. You're not digging into why you felt a little, why you always have some, you always are critiquing that, that your supervisor of color more often than not. And you're like, no, it's not about race. I'm just having these blah, 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 blah. But you're not necessarily critiquing how that can show up in certain ways. And I think it's not very clear. People aren't really clear about how racism can show up. And then they're not really clear about what acknowledgement looks like. There was an article, I forget his name, but there was a guy who was there in Charlottesville, you know, with the tiki torches, whatever. And he was interviewed by like a white supremacist like paper or something. Well, it went like viral and I got national news, and his family was like, I don't see how, I think his name was Peter or something, I think. His family was like, I don't understand how Peter could have gotten this way. Like we have Black friends, or we never, like, we aren't racist people. And so then my thought is like, if you're actually really interested in shifting a racist structure, then you would have had those conversations with your son. It's not just, you're not just letting them know that you got Black friends, like you're actually clear about what their whiteness means, what this Blackness means in this structure, and your children are clear about that, not just saying that it's okay to have a Black friend. And so what does acknowledgement actually look like? And people don't really do that. And so they rather just kind of stay clear and just try and make sure people understand them to be the good person. And I'm not one of those people, as opposed to saying like, you might still be one of those people. Amy Cooper, I don't know if y'all saw, they leaked out that she was a liberal. She donated to Barack Obama. She donated to like Pete Buttigieg. Like they put all her business out there. So if you were to come to her and be like, are you racist? She's like, no, I have Black friends. I voted for Obama. And it's like, so Because the way you're like, what your racism shows up, it's not lynchings, it's you don't like it when someone questions your power. And you felt you had the power to walk in that park with your dog unleashed. And how dare you, Black man, tell me to put my dog on a leash? It's in those circumstances that people don't check their racism, because they don't see them, they only see racism as that dramatic Charlottesville kind of version. And it's like, nah, it's way more insidious than that. I'm from a small Southern town. It's like, I get the Confederate flag stuff. Like, I know who you are from a mile away. It's this liberal, like progressive kind of racism that is insidious, because they don't even know they're racist. And that's the scary part.
So Benji, it's really complex. But I think it's a very, as a forward thinking, like taking the word progressive out, very forward thinking of how we do things. As much as it is a complexity, there are like some things that we can all start doing in our own ways. Well, we are at an hour.
Yep.
And
The internet didn't cut out, so we're going to have full video this time.
Oh man, tech difficulties. But I really appreciate you, all of you, being here. I saved all the links. I'm saving the chat as well, and we'll post this on the resource link for Wrestling Yellowbird's website. And I really appreciate you guys coming, and really to just take the time to be in this moment of what has happened today. It's sometimes I don't even really think I have words for it, but I really would hope that we all just kind of take in this moment for what it is and what we've lived through. So that's all I got, unless Benji has something.
Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you for Jessica for teaching and leading us through this stuff. I do not think it is coincidence that we have had the day that we've had, and that we are meeting tonight, and that we are continuing to dive into this stuff and you know, get into the details on it. I leave the discussions full and just so encouraged, I guess is the word. I don't even know what word to use, but just, you know, I have hope. There's just hope for me, and it, you know, I want to do the tough work. I've got kids, and you know, when you're, Melissa, when you're talking about some of that stuff and those conversations that have to be had, that I would have the courage to be able to have those with them, and then to think what that will lead them to do in their adult lives, and even in their lives as children. So thanks everybody, and we'll put all the links up and all that kind of stuff, and then we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.